I'm Aileen Mioko Smith. I'm Executive Director of Green Action. We're based in Kyoto, Japan.
And how long have you been working around the issue of nuclear power?
It'll be 30 years next year. Japan has 54 nuclear power plants, but over these 30 years there's been a very active movement to try to prevent nuclear power plants from being built. And without that movement, we would probably have like 80 plants. So I've been involved in the fight to delay construction, also to stop construction of nuclear power plants. Also, Japan has a program to use plutonium as a source of energy. And we've been fighting to not have that program go forward. That means like developing a new type of reactor called fast breeder reactor, and been very heavily involved in trying to stop that. And also reprocessing, which is separating out plutonium from used nuclear fuel. It's tons and tons of it. Japan wants to use like 400 tons, which is, much more than all the plutonium and all the nuclear weapons in the world. So we've been trying to stop that program.
And who is pushing the development and expansion of nuclear power in Japan?
Well, the nuclear industry, they make a lot of money out of it. The Toshiba, Hitachis, and Mitsubishis, they make a lot of money out of construction of nuclear power plants. And the utilities, it's set up so that they have monopolies and they can be guaranteed a percentage of profit out of their investment. So big is good. And they've made a lot of money building these nuclear power plants, sources of electricity. In Japan, the subsidies, nearly 90% of subsidies towards electricity goes to nuclear power alone. That's taxpayer money. And also the consumers pay out of the pocket a lot for nuclear too. So it's been the most expensive source of electricity in Japan, although they hide that.
And what's the relationship of the government to these private utilities like TEPCO?
Well, they're completely, in bed with them. They work completely together. And it's the citizens, the local citizens, which is the fisher folk and the farmers, and citizens in the city, all walks of life that have been fighting that for a long time. It's very interesting that the nuclear industry and the electric utility, they're about 99% men, but the citizens who have fought in Japan since the mid-60s, a nice balance of men and women.
And what is the relationship of the media to this issue? Are people informed in Japan about the dangers, the potential dangers of nuclear energy?
The media does not inform the citizenry. The electric utilities are big advertisers of all the media companies, TV especially, but also the newspapers. And it's interesting. And yes, just talking, that's a way the ads are so big. They're like one of the top advertisers that the media have to listen to what they say. And so the media doesn't report on the reality of nuclear power in Japan.
And this hearing today, the government still refused to do a survey.
The Japanese government wants to first not survey, so there won't be any information. Because if there is information, then they need to evacuate. And the issue right now, today, was that this huge swathe of Fukushima City, that's the capital city of Fukushima Prefecture, 60 kilometers away from the plant, is so heavily contaminated that actually it should be evacuated. And the government wants to make sure that doesn't happen. Both the national government and the prefectural government. It's the seat of the capital, you see, of Fukushima. And if you start talking about evacuation 60 kilometers away, that is admitting the reality that this situation is very, very extensive and very serious. And they're doing everything to not have that happen.
And they knew that this was a potential threat with an earthquake fault and a possible tsunami ahead of time?
Oh, they knew all along. And citizens and specialists, experts have been warning since, well, way back. But for example, the largest nuclear facility in the world, Kashiwazaki Kariwa, the citizens have been pushing and pressing on this issue since 1974, constantly, without a break until today. That's one example. Citizens all over have been doing it. And yet the government and utilities refuse. Earthquakes are a big, big danger. For example, on seismic guide 1978, when the accident happened this March 11th. You can see how backward the seismic guidelines were.
Now, what about the people who've been contaminated, the workers? Are there any reports of people who've got sick as a result of radiation, or is that being covered up as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of cover-up, a lot of lack of investigation and lack of reporting. Unfortunately, we citizens have been working on trying to get children evacuated out of Fukushima, pregnant women. We're concentrating on that. It's really terrible that there isn't a huge movement in Japan supporting the workers because they're getting the brunt of the radiation. And
what happens to these workers?
Well, a lot of them are like they're all a lot of them are subcontract, and but also a lot of we get phone calls from housewives who are very worried that their husband they're with another electric utility in another part of Japan, but they know that next week the husband's going to have to go do cleanup, and they're made to go do it. So
that's a requirement from their job?
Yeah, it seems to be a requirement for the job, unless I guess you don't want to get fired or demoted or whatever. I don't know the real, the concrete situation, but there's a lot of concern among families of nuclear workers all over Japan because of this, because they're having to go in, everybody to go in and pitch in.
And the rods, the spent rods, are still there, and
it's sort of like being braced by these steel bars, and it's still a concern. And we're still having, I don't know why they call it aftershocks. It's like earthquake after earthquake in the Fukushima area. I know a couple months ago I was staying overnight with a colleague from Kyushu who's fighting a nuclear power plant there, and we were woken up sometime after 4 in the morning because of the shaking in Tokyo. And we turned on the TV and they said the earthquake, the epicenter is out of the shore in Fukushima, and we had to hold our breath for quite a while before we saw that the spent fuel pools were still okay. They showed the pool with it's sort of tilted with these rods holding him up. And I thought, wow, there are a lot of workers out there that were involved with shoring up that Unit 4 pool. They're looking this morning and thinking, well, we might be the group that saved Japan,
And what does this lesson of Fukushima mean for the people of the United States? San Onofre, San Luis Obispo, there are many other 100 plants in the United States of nuclear plants, and it seems that the media is not really letting people know the potential dangers.
Yeah, there are over 100 nuclear power plants in the U.S., and the scary thing is a lot of them are really aging, and also there's huge quantities of spent nuclear fuel located all over. I think the big message is, one, is spent nuclear fuel. It's dangerous. Look at Fukushima, and anything can happen in the U.S. These are very vulnerable. They're not kept safely, and so everybody should be concerned about that. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're pro-nuclear, anti-nuclear. These are huge waste pools that are very, very dangerous, and they must be secured. And NGOs I know in the U.S. have formed a coalition and have made those statements. They call it HOSS, H-O-S-S, which is hardened on-site storage. At least, keep it stored more safely. Also earthquakes, yes. California, San Onofre, and Diablo Canyon. I mean, Fukushima citizens are worried about those reactors. And we went with Fukushima family and a couple of other activists from Hokkaido, northern Japan, to New York City when Prime Minister Noda went this September 2011. This was a UN summit that Ban Ki-moon had called about the issue of nuclear power safety. We went there because we wanted to tell the truth about Fukushima. We met with citizens concerned about Indian Point. I lived in New York City for maybe a total of 5 years, and I was just flabbergasted our trip in September, because you just get on the train and you go up the Hudson and there it is. It's really close. And that reactor, 50-mile radius, there's 20 million people living, I heard. And it's the most earthquake is supposed to be the most dangerous earthquake-wise plant in the U.S. And it's so close. I was just amazed. I mean, everybody in New York or living around there should just take a train. Just go to Grand Central and go up and take that train. It's a nice trip on the Hudson River, and you'll see that reactor. It's really close to New York City.
Well, what is the situation of the political parties in Japan? It seems like the major political parties have accepted that there's going to continue to be nuclear power industry, and they have a 30-year plan just to get close down 4 plants. So politically, it seems a situation that the parties here that supposedly represent the people are really accepted nuclear power.
Yeah, all parties will accept. The Social Democratic Party is for nuclear phase out, and now the Communist Party stand is becoming clear. But unfortunately, Democratic Party is no different from the Liberal Democratic Party that we had in power for a long time. Their version of phase out is, decades later. So it's not happening. But the really, really interesting thing that's happening in Japan right now is that without us doing anything, one plant after another gets shut down because each plant goes into outage. That's this annual inspection every 13 months. So they get shut. And now right now, as I'm speaking, only have 10 nuclear power plants operating in Japan right now, out of the 54 total. And later this month, a couple more get shut, and then December more, until we're down to only several plants by January, February. So the key thing is restart. If we can oppose restart effectively and not have these plants restart, nuclear phase out is a reality. Right now, it's not a reality policy-wise, but physically, we're well into reality, physically right now with only 10 plants operating. So the key struggle over the next 4 months is the restart issue. And we're saying it's not safe to restart these plants.
Do you think as long as you have private control of the energy industry, you can really have alternative sources like solar and other healthier means of energy?
Yeah, the key thing is to separate the grid. The power production and the distribution, unfortunately, the law that got passed is still delaying that. But that's really what's needed. But the other key thing is this crunch time. Nuclear power reactors can't operate. The nuclear regulatory regime in Japan has collapsed pretty much, and also the rug.
Who's running the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Japan?
Well, still NISA, but even that's a nuclear and industrial safety agency. But even the government is saying it needs to be revamped. You see, so we're in the process of revamping the nuclear regulation. In the meantime, the politicians are going to decide whether reactors can restart or not, and then they're going to ask the IAEA. It's sort of a rigged up process of. Basically, politicians are non-professionals finally deciding, well, we'll let these go and you can restart. That's not good nuclear safety regulation. And also the rug's been pulled out. You didn't have to worry about loss of power for a long time. That was the basis on which all the plants would have to worry about loss of power for a long period of time. So all the plants are sort of running with the foundation kind of taken off from under them. We have to restart really can't happen if you really look at safety issues.
And the regulations as far as the amount of exposure for radiation has seemed to change. Why don't you talk about how the rules have been changed as far as what you can get in radioactive material? Yeah,
standards aren't standards when you just change them according to the situation. Because the standard was for the public 1 millisievert annual exposure. So remember the figure 1. And then they just changed it for Fukushima.
And what was the justification?
There was an accident, and so for a period of time, the ICRP, this is the commission, this international sort of commission, the Wizard of Oz of nuclear power, it has these standards, after the accident, et cetera, et cetera. So it got raised to 20. It's not a legal standard, and nobody in the government takes responsibility in saying, we decided it should be 20. It's really crazy. The Nuclear Safety Commission doesn't say that we decided, and neither does NISA, neither does this Ministry of METI, anyway, any of the ministries. And yet it's a thing that's being used. And Fukushima citizens point out, why are we any different from the rest of the country? So we should be we have equal rights for protection from radiation. Our children have equal rights of protection from radiation. And I think it's really important to know that Japan is way behind the former Soviet Union when it comes to the standards, because in the Soviet Union, required evacuation was at 5, whereas in Japan 20, and even pregnant women are allowed to remain, or they aren't given the right to evacuate. And then for Chernobyl, between 1 and 5 millisieverts. You had the so-called right to evacuate. That means government support for resettlement. Well, none of that's available for citizens of Japan. I mean, these citizens right now have come down in buses from Watari, and this is part of Fukushima City and heavily contaminated area. These areas would get government support for evacuation if it were the former Soviet Union. They aren't getting it in Japan today in 2011.
How do you explain this double standard?
Well, it's convenience. It's just you make a standard, and then suddenly by changing the standard, you make everything all right. They don't want spend money to evacuate. They do not want a situation where a prefecture in Japan is losing population and is losing its whole infrastructure, its basis for taxes and everything like that, because of an accident. Because then evacuating major numbers of people out would be a big problem. However, it's a lot has to do with money, and a lot has to do with trying to maintain just status quo and not changing everything, because there are parts of Fukushima Prefecture that have a lot less contamination. So they could help, the local authorities, the prefecture authorities could help movement within Fukushima Prefecture even to areas that are much cleaner, and they don't do that either. Oh, people are outraged. Yes, citizens are outraged. I mean, individual citizens are going out and making measurements, and that's why they can push the government, saying the levels are high. University professors are using weekends, and they go up there to examine, to check. Organic farmers are uniting together. Moms and pops, they're groups that are forming all over Japan. They're called Mama Papa groups. they're parents who were concerned about exposure of radiation from food for their children. This is hundreds of kilometers away, really far away from Fukushima. So all over the country, people are now concerned, and so it's a fight between democracy and this bureaucracy and industry that wants to still have its cake and eat it, kind of.
You think capitalism can solve this problem?
Well, it isn't capitalism. It's total bailout. Tokyo Electric is one of the largest companies in the world, electric utility, and it and the government caused this accident. I mean, clearly, it's not the earthquake and tsunami that did it, because it shouldn't have been built there, and it's those boardroom decisions and government bureau decisions that built the plant. So they should have to pay for it, But there's this total bailout of Tokyo Electric, where taxpayers are just, it's like a open bailout.
Are any parties calling for the expropriation of the energy industry because of what's happened with nuclear power?
No political parties are advocating that loudly. No, none. And so, Tokyo Electric should go bankrupt. That's the important message, instead of a bailout, because then, you can still have dangerous nuclear power plants and know that even no matter what disaster, your company's going to be okay. I mean, that's continuing to abet nuclear power. Yeah.
Now, what about the unions? The unions here, national unions, were supporting nuclear power. Has that changed, Rengo and other unions?
No, the unions are, because they're electric utility worker unions, and of course a portion of them are nuclear power plant worker unions, so they are pro-nuclear.
Despite what's happened? Despite the fact their members are being radiated?
Yeah, despite that. Despite that. The biggest message is that, you were saying about capitalism. In a way, we need capitalism, real genuine capitalism, to get Tokyo Electric bankrupt. We have they get the benefit of capitalism, and yet when there's a problem, they get the benefit of total bailout.
But isn't that a capitalist government? They bail out the capitalists when they go bankrupt, and the little people get screwed.
Yeah. That's what the real face of capitalism is. So this situation here is the same as, the whole Wall Street tobacco. A TEPCO should be a Lehman. You have to.
What is the future here? Are you optimistic about a real change in Japan and also around the world around the issue of nuclear power?
Well, I'm very excited with what's happening right now because, and it's based on the tragedy of the tragedy is happening in Fukushima, which is just really sad, because we're in year one, and the longer it goes, the more contaminated, the more illness there would be, and we need action now. But because of Fukushima, we have this incredible situation where the nuclear power plants keep getting shut down, and we only have a few operating. And so we have the opportunity, if we could pull it off and not have restart, we could end up phasing out of nuclear power faster than Germany. And that's what we want to aim for. We want to give back a present to the German people who actually have been assertive and decided on nuclear phase out, and they made it law clearly in 2020. Well, we want to give back a present that says, this horrible thing happened in Japan, but as a result, Japan is weaning itself out of nuclear power really fast. And it can be done, and to be able to show the world it could be done really fast, so that other countries like Germany and everybody else could go, hey, wait a second, we should do it really fast. By the 1-year anniversary, I think that pregnant women and children need to be protected, be able to be in a safe environment, have the right to evacuate, meaning families have financial support of the government so that they can have an equal quality of life in a different place, less contaminated if they so choose. And that in the first anniversary, that will be March 11th, I think there will be only one nuclear power plant operating and none of the others restarted. That would be the best. There's only one that's going to have an outage after March 11th.